All right, Hotep, everybody. Hey, this is Michael Imhotep, founder of the African History Network, host of the African History Network show, the talk show host, researcher, lecturer, writer, and historian. So it is Tuesday, March 17th. It is St. Patrick's Day for some, and we are live. So everybody share this broadcast on your social media pages and invite your friends to tune in. It's going to be a real history lesson. So I'm going to deal with some of the history of St. Patrick's Day. St. Patrick, dispel some myths about St. Patrick's Day. And we'll deal with, how St. Patrick's Day is not for African Americans. St. Patrick's Day is not for African Americans. We'll deal with some history also about how the Irish became white in the U.S. And then I'll debunk some myths regarding were the Irish slaves in the U.S. as well. A lot of times around St. Patrick's Day, you'll see memes on social media, Facebook, things like this, that say that the Irish were slaves and they had it just as hard as African slaves, and you don't hear them talking about reparations or anything like that. Okay, so that's a myth. So I'm going to deal with all of that. All right, so everybody share this broadcast. Hope everybody's doing well. I'll still be doing broadcasts updating you on what's going on with the coronavirus as well. You've been watching my broadcast dealing with that. Okay. All right, so let's jump into this. And then we have Anthony and Jamie on Facebook. Follow us on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network. Also, since a lot of people are home and a lot of children are home with their parents, I want to let you know that my online course is a 8-week, I think it's probably about 16 hours. It's an online course. It's all on demand. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa. Understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa. Understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Okay, so we just posted the link here. It's also on the homepage of our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. It's on sale $80. So as soon as you register for that, you can start watching it. Okay, so a lot of people know that March 17th is St. Patrick's Day. St. Patrick's Day is named after a real person. It's named after a person who was canonized as a saint. Patrick died on March 17th, 461 AD, okay, in Saul Downpatrick, Ireland. So he was born approximately 385 AD in Roman Great Britain. So at this time, 385 AD, 4th century, what we know as England under control of the Anglo-Saxons does not exist, okay? So the Roman Empire is the dominant force at this time. So St. Patrick was a Christian missionary. He was a bishop and apostle of Ireland. He also became a patron saint to Ireland as well. All right. Now, each year, St. Patrick's Day generates somewhere between $5 to $6 billion. It was expected this year that St. Patrick's Day, Americans would spend $6.16 billion on St. Patrick's Day. Now, that was based upon a study coming from the National Retail Federation, NRF.com, the National Retail Federation. That came out late February 2020. That was before the coronavirus really took off. So there's no telling what happened. I have to check them out and see what the actual results were. But each year, somewhere between 130 to 140 million Americans participate. Okay, so, and then, there are numerous parades that take place in Chicago, Detroit, New York, etc. Some of those parades this year were canceled because of the coronavirus. Just as in 1918, you had some parades that were canceled, like in the city of St. Louis. Okay, the city of Philadelphia went on with their parade in 1918, and that helped the Spanish flu of 1918 spread. So check out the broadcast that I did dealing with the Spanish flu of 1918, how it's similar to the coronavirus. So much of what is known about Patrick's life comes from a book that he wrote called Confessio. This is a book he wrote in his later years. He was born in Roman Great Britain, right around 385 AD, so 4th century AD. Now, he, at the age of 16, he was kidnapped and brought to Ireland as a slave about the age of 16. He later escaped, but returned to Ireland and was credited with bringing Christianity to the people of Ireland. Okay, so within the legend of St. Patrick, there are a lot of myths. All right, green was not his color. He was not Irish. Okay, and even though he's credited with teaching Christianity to the Irish, there was a Christian priest who was sent into Ireland before him as well. Okay, so we're going to deal with some of these myths. And then also when we deal with one of the biggest myths about St. Patrick is he drove the snakes out of Ireland. Okay, and that deals with the Druids. I'm going to deal some with that as well. That deals with the Druids, and the Druids were dealing with a watered down, these are priests in Ireland. They're dealing with a watered down version of teachings coming out of ancient Kemet, coming out of ancient Egypt. Okay, so we see how all of this history is connected. Now, I may say some things that outside the circumference of some people's own awareness. I may say some things that outside the circumference of your own awareness. Just because you never heard them before, disagree with them, or don't like them does not mean that they are not true. It just means you have to do some research to understand what I'm talking about, number one. Number two, when I talk about some of the history of the Irish and how the Irish were dehumanized and how the Irish became white, things like this, I'm not talking about the Irish in a derogatory manner. I'm dealing with history. I'm a historian, so I'm looking at this historically and understanding the history of this country. Okay, and I say that because different social media platforms have new social media standards, etc. So that's not hate speech. I'm dealing with history, and I'm going to provide you with a number of different sources also to document what I'm talking about. Okay, so St. Patrick lived during the 4th and 5th century AD. He was born around 385 AD, dies 461. He's the patron saint and national apostle of Ireland. Now, a patron saint is a person who's elevated to the status of saint. We see this in the Catholic Church, but even before the Catholic Church, we saw this in the Eastern Orthodox Church. Contrary to popular belief, 4th century AD, 5th century AD, the Catholic Church does not exist at this time. The Catholic Church comes into existence in 11th century AD, right around 1052, 1054 AD. The Catholic Church splits from the Eastern Orthodox Church. So I know a lot of people talk about the First Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, and Emperor Constantine, and the Council of Ephesus in 431 AD, things like this. Catholic Church does not exist at this time. It's the Eastern Orthodox Church. So it's important to understand this. Okay, so Patrick was born in Roman Great Britain, or probably Scotland, depending upon the area. Okay, a lot of the same geographical boundaries that exist today didn't exist at this time, the territorial boundaries. He was born to a well-to-do Christian family of Roman citizenship. Patrick was captured and enslaved at age 16 by Irish marauders. For the next 6 years, he worked as a herder in Ireland, turning to a deepening religious faith for comfort. Following the counsel of a voice he heard in a dream one night, he escaped and found passage on a ship back to Britain, where he was eventually reunited with his family. Now, when we talk about patron saints, it's important to understand a patron saint was someone who was elevated to sainthood. And it's said that that saint, or usually the spirit of that saint, is said that that saint watches over a group of people. It could be over a nation like Ireland. Patrick is the a patron saint to Ireland. It can be over a group of people. So, for instance, Saint Nicholas, who the little kids around, if there are little kids around, you may want them to leave. Saint Nicholas is the real person who the mythological character of Santa Claus is based upon. Okay, Santa Claus, I have a whole 3-hour lecture that I do dealing with the whole history of Christmas. Okay, it's available at my website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Santa Claus comes from the Dutch word Sinterklaas. Sinterklaas means Saint Nicholas. Santa Claus it comes from the mythological character of Father Christmas, who we see among the Dutch, and is depicted as an old man, white beard, wearing a white and red outfit. That mythological character of Father Christmas is based upon the real character of the real person of Nicholas, who was a bishop who became canonized as a saint, became canonized as a saint. And in all actuality, Nicholas was an African bishop. Okay, when we study early Christianity, a lot of your early Christian saints were Africans. In the documentary Hidden Colors, it's either Hidden Colors 2 or Hidden Colors 4, they deal with the real Saint Nicholas. Okay, and the further back you go and look at the paintings, the further back in time you go look at the paintings, the darker he is. A lot of your early Christian saints were Africans. Okay, and also, now this may go outside the circumference of some people's awareness. Okay, just because you never heard it before, disagree with it, or don't like it, does not mean it's not true. Just means you have to do some research to understand what I'm talking about. Also, when we deal with early Christianity, early Christianity looked a lot like traditional African spiritual systems. A lot of what we know about Christianity today is after you had the intellectual, philosophical battles between groups of African Christians and groups of European Christians. And this is what's going to be debated and solved at the 21 ecumenical councils, largely the 21 ecumenical councils that take place between 325 AD and 1870. One of those debates was the Third Council of Trent of 1563 AD, and because of the Third Council of Trent, that's why the Gregorian calendar of 1582 was introduced, named after Pope Gregory XIII, because they're trying to recalibrate when to celebrate Easter. Because when they originally, before the Gregorian calendar, they were using the Julian calendar. The Julian calendar was named after Julius Caesar. The calculations of the Julian calendar were for each year, the calculations were about 10 minutes off. So they were celebrating Easter further and further away from the vernal equinox. The vernal equinox marks the first day of spring. Based upon the Gregorian calendar, the vernal equinox occurs usually March 20th, March 21st, some years March 22nd. Vernal equinox is Latin. Vernal means spring, spring. Latin equinox comes from aquanatium, which means equal nights. So vernal equinox marks the first day of spring, and it basically means equal nights. It means it's the time of the year where you have the same amount of daylight as you do nighttime. Okay, that marks the first day of spring. So what happened was, the reason why the Gregorian calendar had to be introduced is they had to recalibrate or recalculate when to celebrate Easter. So based upon the Gregorian calendar and based upon what was decided coming out of the Third Council of Trent in 1563 AD, Easter is celebrated on the first Sunday following the first full moon following the vernal equinox. This is what determines when Easter is celebrated. I was teaching an entrepreneurship class at Wayne County Community College District about 10 years ago. And I asked the class, how many people celebrate Easter? And everybody's hand went up. It was basically all African Americans. And I asked, what determines when Easter is celebrated? Somebody said the calendar. Somebody said, my pastor tells me. I said, no, how does your pastor know? Easter is a movable feast. Easter commemorates the resurrection of Jesus the Christ, or Yeshua, because the letter J wasn't invented till 1630 AD. So his name cannot have been. Now this may go outside the circumference of some people's awareness. Okay, I'm a researcher. I'm a historian. Look up the word Jesus in a dictionary, Merriam-Webster dictionary online. Look up the word Jesus. It takes you back to the Hebrew Yeshua, because the letter J wasn't invented till 1630 AD. The letter J is derived from the letter I. So when you study the various alphabets. You study the origins of the alphabets and things like this. You look at the middle letter, you look at the Greek alphabet, Phoenician, Hebrew. There's no letter J. This is why if you look at the Quran, the Holy Quran, the prophet's name in the Quran is Isa with an I. Because when the Quran was written, the letter J didn't exist. Jesus is the anglicized version of Yeshua. The letter J is derived from the letter I. The letter J is an I with a hook on it. But when you don't understand history, don't understand language, right? See, one of the biggest mistakes that we make is we think the way things are today is the way they've always been, and that's not true. That's why you have to understand history to find out why things are today the way they are. That's one of the reasons why we study history. So the Gregorian calendar is the calendar that we use today. It's based upon how long it takes the sun to, it's based upon how long it takes the earth to rotate around the sun. It takes 365 days, 5 hours, 48 minutes, approximately 46 seconds. Okay. That's known as a solar year. All right. And then every 4 years, like this year, 2020, you add an extra day to February. Okay. So February has 29 days. That's a leap year. So when we deal with this history, it takes us in different directions. As you see here, it takes us in different directions. Okay. So I'm trying to give you the short version of this explanation. All right. For the sake of time and to conserve my energy. All right. So, but when we have patron saints like St. Maurice was a Moor. St. Maurice is a patron saint of Germany. Now, the patron saints were saints who were said to watch over different people, watch over groups of people. St. Nicholas was a patron saint to Russia. He was also a patron saint to pawnbrokers, money lenders, prostitutes, children, etc. Early Christianity looked a lot like traditional African spiritual systems. And you can use the Helios Biblos, the Holy Bible, and it'll take you right back to ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt. Because when we look at the word Christ, Christ is a title, not a name. Christ is a title. The word Christ comes from the Greek word Christos, meaning anointed or anointed one. Christos comes from Charest, which is from the metal letter, Charest, which means the rising of the spirit. Okay. And then when we talk about the Druids, we're going to see how this connects, how the Druids connect to ancient Kemet. All right. So I'm just trying to lay this out for you and hopefully do this in 2 hours because it's been hectic. It's been a hectic week already. All right. So the Irish have let's see. Okay. So Patrick is later going to escape and go back to his family in Roman Great Britain. Now he's going to return. He's going to end up returning to Ireland. However, and he was credited with bringing Christianity to the people of Ireland. In the centuries following Patrick's death, people which it is believed that he died on March 17th, 461 AD. The mythology surrounding his life became ever more ingrained in the Irish culture. Perhaps the most well-known legend is that he explained the Holy Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, using the three leaves of a native Irish clover, or what people call a shamrock. All right. Now, each year in the U.S., there are more than 100 St. Patrick's Day parades. We see them taking place in New York City, Boston, Detroit, etc. We saw some of them canceled this year. Now, according to his book, The Confessio, in Britain, Patrick had another dream in which an individual named Victorious gave him a letter entitled The Voice of the Irish, The Voice of the Irish. As he read it, Patrick seemed to hear the voices of Irishmen pleading with him to return to their country and walk among them once more. After studying for the priesthood, Patrick was ordained a bishop. He arrived in Ireland in 433 AD and began preaching the gospel, converting thousands of Irish to Christianity and building churches around the country. After 40 years of living in poverty, teaching, traveling, and working tirelessly, Patrick died on March 17th, 461 AD in Saul, Downpatrick, Ireland, where he had built his first church. Now, if you've heard me talk about Patrick before, in general, talking about St. Patrick's Day, because I posted on Facebook and you've heard me say this before. If you wear green on St. Patrick's Day, will you wear red, black, and green on African Liberation Day? If you wear green on St. Patrick's Day, will you wear red, black, and green on African Liberation Day? If not, why not? Okay, because African Liberation Day is May 25th. All right. And African Liberation Day commemorates May 25th, 1963, when 31 African nations convened at a summit meeting to found the Organization of the Organization of African Unity, the OAU, the Organization of African Unity. All right. So every year, May 25th, or that weekend, many of us celebrate African Liberation Day. I would see people each year wearing green for St. Patrick's Day. And when I asked them, why are you wearing green, they say it's for St. Patrick's Day. I asked them, who was St. Patrick? They say he was a saint. Why are you wearing green for St. Patrick's Day? Many of us participate in European holidays and don't know why. We can't explain why. Okay. And I saw this firsthand a few years ago. I was working at a call center and I came to work one day and I saw people wearing green. I saw African-Americans wearing green. And I said, oh, this is St. Patrick's Day. So I asked them about it. And the best they could tell me was he was a saint. The truth of the matter is Patrick was a mass murderer. The truth of the matter is Patrick was also a mass murderer. Okay. And he killed thousands of Druids. So I encourage people to read this book. African People and European Holidays, a Mental Genocide by Dr. Shaka Musa Barashango. African People and European Holidays, a Mental Genocide by Dr. Shaka Musa Barashango. This is book 1, all right? And he deals with the origins of these holidays. There's a book 1 and book 2. He deals with the origins of these holidays, these European holidays, so we can understand what it is that we are participating in, all right? So if you celebrate St. Patrick's Day, I'm not beating up on you. Okay, but it's important for us to understand the history of what it is we're participating in, because a lot of us, like when I was a child, we were taught to wear green on St. Patrick's Day when we were kids, and we didn't know who Patrick was and none of this stuff, and our teachers didn't know either. They were just operating based upon what they'd been taught. So they taught us, they mistaught us what they were mistaught. But Patrick's color was not green, it was actually blue when you actually study the history. Okay, so all right, so let's leave that there. Let's continue here. Also, if you like this type of information, you can donate to the African History Network. $, the AHN Show through Cash App. $, the AHN Show through Cash App, and PayPal.me/the AHN Show through PayPal. PayPal.me/the AHN Show through PayPal. All right, or at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Click on the yellow donate button. And also, African American business owners, post the name of your business here on the thread of the broadcast. Email us at customerservice@AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Customer service at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We'll let you know how you can advertise with the African History Network. Current promotion: buy 1 month, get 2 months free. That's going on for a few more days here because we just brought on, I think, 3 new advertisers. Okay, so according to, all right, so Patrick arrives in England around 433 AD. And begins preaching the gospel. Now, after he dies in March 17, 461 AD, he's canonized as a saint. So that's his feast day. Okay, that's his feast day, March 17th. Since that time, countless legends have grown up around Patrick. He was made the patron saint of Ireland. He is said to have baptized hundreds of people on a single day, and is said to have used a three-leaf clover, the famous shamrock, to describe the Holy Trinity. In artwork, he is often portrayed trampling on snakes in accordance with the belief, that he drove the snakes out of Ireland. For thousands of years, the Irish have observed the day of St. Patrick's death as a religious holiday, attending church in the morning and celebrating with food and drink in the afternoon. Okay. And I said, you know, when I speak at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History for Kwanzaa, and I talk about Kwanzaa and I talk about celebrating European holidays, you know, I also say, I talk about St. Patrick's Day, and I say St. Patrick was a mass murderer. Okay. And sometimes, you know, people take offense to me saying that. So I have to be careful sometimes how I express something, right? All right. So now, since around the 9th or 10th century AD, people in Ireland have been observing the Roman Catholic feast day of St. Patrick on March 17th. Interestingly, however, the first parade held to honor St. Patrick's Day took place not in Ireland, but in the United States. Not in Ireland, but in the United States. So St. Patrick's Day gained popularity in the U.S., especially in places like Boston, because of an Irish influx, especially in the mid-19th century, starting about 1845, because of the Irish potato famine. So because of various migrations, the people, when they come to this country, they bring with them their traditions, their foods, etc. And then those traditions become part of overall what's looked at as American culture. So on March 17th, 1762, Irish soldiers serving in the English military marched through New York City. And there were Irish coming to this country before the Irish potato famine in 1845. That was when a huge wave came to this country, but you had Irish coming before then in the 1700s. Now, along with their music, the parade helped the soldiers reconnect with their Irish roots, as well as with fellow Irishmen serving in the English Army. Okay. Shout out to everybody watching us on our YouTube channel. We got RWP, we've got May, Ernest joined us, Patricia, Born Eternal, Journal of Jade News, Ginger, just a few people watching us on YouTube, Black Spectrum, Versace, and then also broadcasting on my personal Facebook page, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP, and on Periscope, the AHN Show on Periscope. So shout out to everybody watching us there, and also on our fan page, the African History Network. We've got Ann Jones, Patricia, Tony watching us there as well. Is March the first month of the year? Which calendar are you referring to, Tony? Different calendars have originally March was the first calendar. Originally March on the Julian calendar, if I remember correctly, on the Julian calendar, originally March was the first month. The Gregorian calendar put January and February as the first 2 months, and March moves to the third month. The Julian calendar had 10 months. That's why December, December meaning 10, there were 10 months. Okay. So if you read Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization by Tony Browder, which is one of my sources for this presentation here. If you read Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization by Tony Browder, he talks about the different calendars in here. Also at Britannica.com, Encyclopedia Britannica's website, you can look up Julian calendar and Gregorian calendar, etc. But this all deals with understanding a chronology of history, okay? And then you read the calendar that they were using in ancient Kemet, because a lot of those other Julian calendar is really it is a variation of the calendar we were using in ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt. Okay, so the Irish have observed March 17th as a religious holiday for over 1,000 years. On St. Patrick's Day, which falls during the Christian season of Lent, Irish families would traditionally attend church in the morning and celebrate in the afternoon. Lenten prohibitions against the consumption of meat were waived, and people would dance, drink, and feast on the traditional meal of Irish bacon and cabbage. All right. Now, very quickly here, if we look at dispelling some myths, and then what I want to do is get into the relationship between St. Patrick, the Druids, and ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt. If we look at some myths, history.com has a good article dealing with St. Patrick's Day myths debunked. First of all, Patrick was not Irish. Okay, Patrick was not Irish. Though one of Ireland's patron saints, Patrick was born in what is now England, Scotland, or Wales. England, Scotland, or Wales. Okay, and that's usually referred to as like the Great Britain. Great Britain. Interpretations vary widely. He was born to a Christian deacon and his wife, probably around the year 390 AD. Some sources say 385 AD. So you'll see circa somewhere around there, somewhere around 385, 390 AD. According to the traditional narrative, at 16, he was enslaved by Irish marauders, Irish raiders who attacked his home. They transported him to Ireland and held him captive there for 6 years. Patrick later fled to England, where he received religious instruction before returning to Ireland to serve as a missionary. Now, another myth is that St. Patrick was British. Okay, his birthplace does not mean Patrick was British. He was born in general in Roman Great Britain. During his lifetime, the British Isles were occupied by the Romans, a group that included Patrick's parents and thus the saint himself. It is unknown whether his family thought to have been part of the Roman aristocracy, was of indigenous Celtic descent, or hailed from modern-day Italy. When Patrick penned the 2 surviving documents attributed to him, he wrote in Latin and signed his name Patricius, Patricius, but according to some accounts, he was born Maewyn Succat, Maewynsuscat. The other myth is that St. Patrick brought Christianity to Ireland, even though he did go into Ireland as a missionary and proselytize and convert people to Christianity. However, in 431 AD, before Patrick began preaching in Ireland, Pope Celestine I reportedly sent a bishop known as Palladius, Palladius, quote, to the Irish believing in Christ, end quote, an indication that some residents of the Emerald Isle had already converted to Christianity by the time Patrick got there. One theory holds that St. Patrick of folklore is actually an amalgam of 2 men, Palladius and the deacon's son, who first visited Ireland as a slave. Okay, and then green has historically been associated with Patrick. Okay, and when we were little kids, we were told to wear green on St. Patrick's Day, otherwise somebody would pinch you. Now, we didn't know why. We were just playing along the game, and we were playing along with the game because our teachers didn't know any better either. They were misprogrammed, and they misprogrammed us. The Irish countryside may be many shades of green, but knights in the Order of St. Patrick wore a color known as St. Patrick's blue. Knights in the Order of St. Patrick wore a color known as St. Patrick's blue. Why did green become so symbolic or emblematic of St. Patrick that people began drinking green beer, wearing green, and of course, dyeing the Chicago River green to mark the holiday he inspired? The association probably dates back to the 18th century, when supporters of Irish independence used the color to represent their cause. Now, okay, so check this out, history.com, St. Patrick's Day myths debunked. St. Patrick's Day myths debunked. There's some also, because I have a lot of stuff, this is my whole file on St. Patrick's Day. It was, when we look at green, for instance, let's look at this one here. This is from Huffington Post. It is, people started wearing, let's see here. It dealt with people started wearing green. I think we'll find that here. Okay. Okay, he wears blue in artwork. The shamrock is not the symbol of Ireland. It is a popular symbol, but not the symbol of Ireland. The official symbol of Ireland is the harp. Okay. Also, your odds of finding a four-leaf clover is 1 in 10,000. All right, look at 10 fun facts about St. Patrick's Day. 10 fun facts about St. Patrick's Day from WDTN.com. That's Channel 2 News in, I forgot which city that is, Dayton, Ohio. 10 fun facts about St. Patrick's Day. Then also HuffingtonPost.com has an article from March 14th, 2014. Everything you know about St. Patrick's Day is wrong. Everything you know about St. Patrick's Day is wrong. So when we look at Patrick and the Druids, right? This is a very, very important piece of history. Okay, we have Willie in Houston, Greg Osborne in Oklahoma City. We got Tony. Everybody share this broadcast on your social media platforms. You're not going to hear this type of information a lot of other places, okay? We got people on YouTube as well. All right, pages 193 and 194 of Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization by Tony Browder. Browder connects the dots with this. Now, Browder's a friend of mine. I've interviewed him a number of times. But first off, he talks about Dahuti, okay? So Dahuti, this gets into understanding, this gets into ancient African history. Okay, so just bear with me while I help lay a foundation here. So Dahuti, or who the Greeks called Thoth, was a deity or a neter, okay, who was known to Europeans as Hermes. Okay, Hermes Trismegistus. Hermes means thrice great. He was known as Hermes Trismegistus. Hermes means thrice great. And let's pull up, let's go to, I'm gonna go to my slide here. So some of this I deal with in the online course that I teach, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. We have the entire class on demand. It's, I think it's probably 9 classes, about 2 hours each, something like that. So it's close to 16, 18 hours. And we deal with thousands of years of history. Okay, so that's on sale now, $80, regular $130. And we'll post a link here again. It's available at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. You can watch from around the world. All right. So this is a picture of a Druid. Okay. And the Druid style of dress was similar to the ancient priests in ancient Kemet. Now, Dahuti was known to Europeans as Hermes Trismegistus, Hermes thrice great. Okay. And Hermes was a philosopher, priest, and king. He was regarded as the god or deity of wisdom, science, medicine, magic, measurement, and mathematics. And he is said to have authored innumerable books on these and other subjects. All right. And if you look at page 193, 194 in Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization, you'll see this information. And this is under the section, the development of European secret societies, okay? So Hermes is said to have been the author of 42 books, which contain the wisdom, of ancient Egypt. According to the author Manly P. Hall, he said, quote, the Romans and later the Christians realized that until these books, these 42 books, until these books were eliminated, they could never bring the Egyptians into subjugation. So you have to take away these books that have this knowledge, okay, so that the subsequent generations won't know this information. So books on the Hermetic sciences were said to contain information regarding the ancient Kemetic people's understanding, or ancient Egyptians' understanding of immortality, which was based on the knowledge that, quote, the body is the tomb of the soul. The body is the tomb of the soul, end quote. So during the Greco-Roman occupation of ancient Kemet or Egypt, the soldiers formed a secret body for specialized scholarship and training in what was called the Hermetic sciences. So the Greco-Roman soldiers, the Greek and Roman soldiers, when they're conquering Egypt, Greece conquers in 332 BC, and the Romans conquer right around 46 BC. Their soldiers are learning this information from the ancient Egyptians, okay? But they're only learning a fraction of this information, all right? So this is why when we talk about Freemasonry and we deal with Freemasonry and we deal with how this relates to ancient Kemet, let's go back to this again, okay? Because these are all some things that I teach in the class, because we deal with the understanding chronology of history and understanding thousands of years of history. For instance, when we talk about Freemasonry, right? Hermes is said to have been the author of the 42 books, which contain the wisdom of ancient Egypt. And this is the foundation of the knowledge of the Masons, okay? Well, the word Mason is derived from the Latin words mass and sun, mass and sun. Mason means child of light and expresses the desire to pursue light, which is a metaphor for the sun. Just a second here. To pursue light, which is a metaphor for the sun. Well, and the sun symbolizes knowledge, okay? So the term child of light or sons and daughters of light was first used to identify students who had completed 42 years of study in the temples of ancient Kemet, 42 years of study in the temples of ancient Kemet or ancient Egypt. Many Masonic temples were modeled after the temples of ancient Kemet, and these were places where light or knowledge was imparted in a series of steps or degrees. This is where knowledge was imparted in a series of steps or degrees. So when we look at institutions, when we look at the concept of liberal arts colleges, the concept of liberal arts comes from the teachings, the 7 liberal arts that were taught in the ancient temples and ancient Kemet, dealing with the, they're broken down basically by the trivium and the quadrivium, okay, the 3 and the 4, the trivium and the quadrivium. In the book Stolen Legacy by George G.M. James, George G.M. James deals with this. So you deal with the logic and the rhetoric, arithmetic, things like this, right? The 7 liberal arts. So when you go to an institution of higher learning, when you go to a university, for instance, your credentials are given to you in a series of degrees. Okay, bachelor's degree, master's degree, PhD, etc. This is where all this is coming from. And they educated African men and African women because we didn't discriminate. They educated African men and African women. All right. So if you read Egypt on the Potomac by Tony Browder, pages 18 to 32, he gets deeper into this. All right. All this history is connected. All this history is connected. All right. So let's go back to the slide here. So now this ties into the Druids, but you have to understand the history that comes before Patrick in 431 AD. And you have to understand the Druids and where they're getting this knowledge from. This coming from us. Okay. So the term child of light or sons and daughters of light was first used to identify students who had completed 42 years of study in the temples of ancient Kemet. Now, throughout history, light has been associated with knowledge. Even when you watch a cartoon and the cartoon character, whether it's Doc McStuffins or, Mickey Mouse or whatever it is, right? You watch a cartoon and the cartoon character gets a bright idea, and bright is associated with light. Dim is associated with lack of light. Dim is associated with darkness or lack of knowledge, as in the Dark Ages. So when the Vandals and the Visigoths crushed the western portion of the Roman Empire in 476 AD, this cast Europe into a period of darkness, a period of ignorance. Then it's going to be the teachings from the Africans known as the Moors, who go into Europe in 711 AD. The Africans known as the Moors are taking the teachings from ancient Kemet, okay, into Europe, And actually, I know I got a more in here somewhere. Where's, do I have it in this presentation? Right here. So it's the Africans known as the Moors who are taking the teachings from ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt, in the Nile Valley region of Africa into Europe in 711 AD, 8th century, and is bringing Europe out of the Dark Ages, and then it brings Europe into going into the late 1400s, early 1500s. They go into the Renaissance age, and the Renaissance age is a new age of awakening, okay? And they're coming into knowledge, but they're coming out of the Dark Ages. And it's going to be the Africans known as the Moors who bring them out of the Dark Ages. And it's all downhill from there. Because once Europeans manufactured the first gun in mid 13th century, or mid 14th century, about 1345, 1346, something like that. It's all downhill from there. Between the gun, the cannon, and the Bible, oh, it's just a matter of time. All right, so I didn't mean to close that out. Let's go back. I wanted to go back to this other one here. All right, so I'm just trying to give you a basic foundation to understand this, okay? And then when we deal with the Moors, right? We deal with ancient Kemet. We deal with things like the ancient Kemetic mystery system, studying in the temples for 42 years. We deal with Freemasonry. Freemasonry ties right into this picture right here. So when we look at the Washington Monument is an ancient African symbol called a tekken. The Greeks call it an obelisk. It's an ancient African symbol coming out of ancient Kemet. There were about 1,200 tekkenu all throughout Kemet, which comes from the, make a long story short, comes from the mythology of Asar, Osset, and Heru, who the Greeks called Osiris, Isis, and Horus, okay? This is where this comes from. It's a symbol of resurrection. But all this ties into history, and it ties into African history as well. All right, so let's go to, so we look at the first holy trinity of Asar. Asar is in the middle, Asar, or who the Greeks called Osiris. His son, Heru, who the Greeks call Horus. His wife, Osset, who the Greeks call Isis. So when we saw the Notre Dame Cathedral catch on fire, I think it was 2019, the Notre Dame Cathedral in France, and you go look at stories talking about that, they talked about how the Notre Dame Cathedral was built on the remains of two temples. One of those temples was dedicated to Isis. Because when you study in European history, all throughout Europe, they were worshiping the Black Madonna and Child. All throughout Europe, let's see, what do I have? Do I have it in here? This is a combination of things. These are some of the slides from the class, but these I have a more extended presentation on this. Let me see. Okay. All throughout Europe, they were worshiping the Black Madonna and Child. They have statues in Russia, Italy, Poland, France. These Europeans were worshiping African people. In the Black Madonna Child comes from the story of Asar, Osset, and Heru, and the depiction you see here of Osset, Isis, with the baby Heru. And then from the Black Madonna and Child, we get the decolorized version of it. Okay, all this history is ancient. And then we deal with, not to get too deep into this, this may go outside the circumference of some people's awareness. We deal with Heru being born on December 25th of a virgin birth to Osset, right? And we deal with the retelling. So if you read books like Christianity Before Christ by Dr. John G. Jackson. Hold on, where's Christianity? Right here. Hold on. Like you read books like this, Christianity Before Christ by Dr. John G. Jackson. When you get it, it probably have a different cover because this book I got December 31st, 1994. Okay, so this book's 26 years old, something like that. But when you read books like this, right, it deals with the various, this may go outside the circumference of some people's awareness, it deals with the various crucified saviors that different people have had at different times throughout history, throughout different cultures. Okay, so what you're dealing with is a retelling of an ancient story. You're dealing with a retelling of an ancient story over and over and over again, adapted to various people's cultures. That's what you're really dealing with. All right, so where are we here? Okay, so let's go back to this one here. I'm just trying to give you a basic foundation, because I understand people are coming to this with different levels of understanding. And so you understand what I'm saying. I'm just trying to give you a basic I'm trying to give you a basic foundation, so you're not too confused by the information I'm talking about, because this is just like the introduction. Okay. All right. So when we look at Masonic temples are considered houses of light, okay, or temples of learning. The term Mason, child of light, is a direct reference to the highest degree of the Kemetic education system. The 33 degrees of instruction within Freemasonry represent a fraction of the 360 degrees of instruction that comprise the ancient Kemetic mystery system or Kemetic system of education. Yet with less than 10% of the wisdom of ancient Kemet, Freemasons have held positions of influence and power throughout the world for over 200 years. So when we talk about what the Greek and Roman soldiers learned when they went into Egypt, right? Our ancestors were operating based upon 360 degrees of knowledge. 10% of 360 is 36. The highest level of attainment in Freemasonry is 33 degrees, because Europeans learned less than 10% of what the ancient Africans knew. This is what we're dealing with here. So read Egypt on the Potomac by Tony Browder. It's a fantastic book, because Egypt on the Potomac, and I've interviewed Browder about this before. Egypt on the Potomac deals with how the layout of Washington, D.C. is based upon ancient African principles. The layout of Washington, D.C. is a copy of the layout of ancient Egypt. That's what Egypt on the Potomac is, okay? And to make a long story short, the Moors are taking the teachings from ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt, into Europe. And during the Second Crusades in 1118 AD, you have a group called the Poor Knights of Christ, who are going to get this information from the Moors, because the Moors are teaching people freely. Okay, the Moors are teaching people freely throughout Europe. Whoever wants to learn, the Moors are there to teach. The Poor Knights of Christ become known as the Knights Templar. The Knights Templar. The Knights Templar become very powerful. They become very knowledgeable. This is at a time when most Europeans are illiterate, when probably 85, 90% of Europeans are still illiterate, basically. And the Knights Templar are going to be disbanded. In France, October 13th, Friday the 13th, October 13th, 1307, a group is going to be rounded up. They're going to be disbanded, and eventually they're going to be totally disbanded in the various countries they're in. The teachings of the Knights Templar are going to go underground. They're going to resurface as the Yorkshire rites of the Freemasons, the Scottish rites of the Freemasons, things like this. Those teachings, they're watered down from ancient Kemet, taken into Europe, taught to the Knights Templar, go underground, resurface as Freemasonry, etc. Those teachings are going to be brought to this land by the Anglos and the Saxons when you have the English colonies set up starting in 1607. So when we look at, for instance, the Declaration of Independence, right? 50 of the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence were Freemasons. But if you don't know where this information comes from, it looks foreign to you. No, that's our stuff coming back to us in the watered down version. 50 of the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence were Freemasons. And 13 of the 39 signers of the U.S. Constitution were Freemasons. 4 of the first 5 presidents were Freemasons, and there have been 14 Freemasons who have been U.S. presidents. But you're dealing with a watered down version of teachings coming out of ancient Kemet, taken into Europe by the Africans known as the Moors, taught to the Knights Templar. Those teachings go underground, and they're taught to what becomes the Freemasons, and those teachings are brought here along with their symbolism. So this is how you get the Washington Monument. This is why you have ancient Africa on the $1 bill with the pyramid. This is why the number 13 appears 13 times on the $1 bill. And 13 is a symbol of transformation and resurrection. Okay, that's enough. You get the idea. I won't go too deep into this. All right. Okay, so did we get all that then? Oh, let me show you this last one here. So when we talked about the Tekken, right? There were approximately 1,200 Tekkenu built in ancient Kemet in ancient times. Kemet meaning land of the blacks, one of the original names for ancient Egypt. You also see the name Ta Mary, meaning the beloved land. But there are only about a dozen Tekken, or Tekkenu for plural. There are only about a dozen Tekkenu today found in Egypt. Many of the Tekkenu removed from Egypt are now in Istanbul, Turkey, London, England, Paris, France, Berlin, Germany, New York, Rome, Italy, Vatican City, and elsewhere throughout the world. So this is the theft of our culture, of African culture. We see these in other places around the world, other countries, cities, things like this. We associate this architecture with the country that it's in, but we don't know it's stolen from Africa. We don't know it's stolen from us. It ties right into African history, ties into who we are. The Tekkenu are now called obelisks by their new owners, and few know their origin or that they symbolize the resurrection of the African king Asar. Okay, read Egypt on the Potomac by Tony Browder for more information. But that's just to give you a basic foundation. Okay. How you doing, Larry, Bessie, Brian, Willie on Facebook? Okay. I say that to say this. When we look at Djibouti, okay, and this is going back to page 193 of Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization. So during the Greco-Roman occupation of ancient Kemet, the soldiers formed a secret body for specialized scholarship and training in the Hermetic sciences. They became known as Druids and later moved from Egypt into Greece and Rome before establishing a school in Ireland. So the teachings from ancient Kemet are being taken back to Greece and Rome through the Greco-Roman soldiers and then taken into Ireland. Now, when we study this ancient history and you read books like The First Americans Were Africans, The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence by Dr. David Imhotep, okay? And he talks about the Khoisan or the Twa, who the anthropology calls pygmies, but the Twa, these are the short stature people. They're going to be there in Ireland also. And when you hear me interview people like Sister Nubia Wartford, who's a cultural anthropologist, and she does archaeological digs in the Sudan. This is the teachings of Imhotep, the oldest book in the world, if you're wondering also. Okay. I have like one stack filled down. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 5 stacks of books next to me. So you're going to have Africans in Ireland also. This is the other thing, but one thing at a time. So page 193, this section is called The Development of European Secret Societies. One of the most enduring aspects of Nile Valley civilization was the proliferation of its scientific and philosophical thought, which became known outside of ancient Kemet as the mystery schools or the Hermetic sciences, tying into Hermes Trismegistus, okay, who also was Djibouti. From the earliest of times, the masses of, now pay close attention to this, Okay, this is going to go outside the circumference of some people's awareness. I'm not trying to offend anybody, but you got to understand European history. From the earliest of times, the masses of Europeans were poor and ignorant, while only the most fortunate men, noblemen, lords, scribes, and various religious leaders were provided with an education. So this is probably like the top 10% are provided with an education in Europe. Of this group, an even smaller number knew how to adequately read or write. So you're probably talking about like the top 1%, probably like the top 1%, maybe 1-2% who can read or write. The dogma of Christianity was readily available for the masses of people, masses of Europeans. While the educated elite studied the ancient teachings, which were also called gnosis or true knowledge. So the question has to be asked, now this is not an attack on anybody's religion, but the question has to be asked, where did the gnosis or true knowledge come from? Okay, so let's go back. Let's look at this again. We'll see, it's running slowly here. I don't want it to freeze up. But when I showed the slide of the Druid, it talked about gnosis or true knowledge, okay? And the newly emerging schools of Hermetic, Neoplatonic, and Gnostic, Gnostic, Gnostic thought in Europe were loosely based on the Nile Valley principles of education, which were designed to awaken within an individual knowledge of self. Knowledge of self. This knowledge of self led to an awareness of the powers of God that exist within man, as expressed in the myths of Asar, Aset, and Heru. See, all of this is connected together. So many of us don't understand what we lost when African history was taken away from us and European culture, European ideology, and European religion was superimposed upon us. Now it is true Christianity. So Professor Kabahaya Hiawatha Kamene, who's one of my teachers, and also Sister Nubia Warford, they will both say Christianity is a traditional African spiritual system. What they basically mean by that, I think, is Christianity took elements from traditional African spiritual systems, and a lot of those elements are still there. It's in a different form. You have to understand. So Professor Kaba talks about how to understand the existence of something. You must first understand the pre-existence of existence. You have to understand what previously existed before Christianity to really understand Christianity. Okay. But if you understand ancient African spiritual systems, especially coming out of ancient Kemet, you'll see the relationship, and you'll see that Christianity is a bridge that we can use to get right back to what we had before foreigners, fakers, and fools came into the continent of Africa, distorted what we had, misinterpreted, etc., copied it and represented it to the world as if it were their own. Let me see. Let's turn on the screen share. Okay. So this is what we're dealing with. So in the Druid language, the word in Old Irish, the word Druid meant he who knows, he who knows. Okay. So this knowledge of self led to an awareness of the powers of God which exists within man, as expressed in the myths of Asar, Aset, and Heru. This philosophy was in direct conflict with Christianity, which taught that man was conceived in sin, and that salvation could only be gained through Jesus the Christ, the Pope, or other accepted intermediaries. Okay, once again, this may go outside the circumference of some people's awareness. One example of the clash between these opposing ideologies can be found by studying the symbolism incorporated in the story of St. Patrick and the Druids. So the Druids believe that the soul does not perish, and that after death, the soul passes into other bodies. The Druids were also known to dress in a style similar to the priestly kings of ancient Kemet. Their heads were adorned with a uraeus, which is a cobra. It was a symbol of the cobra that was worn on the crown of the pharaoh or Nasubiti. Because of this symbolic imagery, the Druids were often referred to by outsiders as the snake people, because they had the crowns with the cobra on it. So to outsiders, they were often referred to as the snake people. Their presence and ideology were viewed as a direct threat to the development of Christianity in Ireland. So in 432 AD, some sources say 431 AD, Pope Celestine I sent a former British slave named Patrick into Ireland to convert the Irish to Christianity. In the name of Christianity, Patrick's army killed thousands of Irishmen, and he is said to have founded more than 300 churches and baptized more than 120,000 people. Patrick also introduced the Roman alphabet and Latin literature into Ireland. Patrick was rewarded by the Vatican with sainthood, and today millions of people throughout the world celebrate St. Patrick's Day on his feast day, March 17th. To the average person who dresses in green, wears shamrocks, and marches in parades, this day commemorates the myth of the man who drove the snakes out of Ireland. What most people fail to realize is that the snakes St. Patrick drove into the sea were not the snakes that crawled on the ground, but the snake people who walked on 2 feet and were once known as Druids. As I said from the start, Patrick was a mass murderer. Patrick killed the Druids, who were practicing a version of the teachings coming out of ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt, which is what our ancestors were practicing. The Romans, who controlled Great Britain, wanted to conquer the Irish and impose Christianity on them. The Druids, who were practicing a watered down version of African spirituality or the teachings coming out of ancient Africa, stood in the way of really Christianity flourishing, or this European version of Christianity really flourishing in Ireland. So Patrick and his army killed thousands of Druids. He was like a hitman. And then he was rewarded by, at this time it wasn't, well, he was rewarded by the Christian church. So in 4th, 5th century AD is the Eastern Orthodox Church. They're going to really start celebrating him. It's going to be, I think, about 10th century AD, somewhere around there. The Catholic Church comes into existence in mid-11th century AD. All right. But see, this is an example of why you have to understand what it is that you're practicing. So when I see African Americans dressing up in green and celebrating St. Patrick's Day, I'm like, who was Patrick? What are you celebrating? You celebrating somebody killing people to force Christianity on them, and they're practicing a watered down version of teachings coming out of ancient Egypt? I mean, if you want to get drunk, just go ahead and get drunk. But I mean, I don't understand what this is. Now, when they talk about Patrick killing the snake people, right? We've heard the myth that Patrick drove the snakes out of Ireland. Well, if you understand the history of Ireland, Ireland is an island. Ireland is in a cold climate. If you know anything about snakes, snakes don't live in cold climates. Snakes live in warmer climates. When you study the history of Ireland, there's no evidence of snakes even being in Ireland. The snakes that he drove out, they were talking about the snake people, the Druids. Read pages 193 and 194 of Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization by Tony Browder. All right, we got Kevin, Audrey, Dap, Wendy. All right, how's everybody doing? Everybody share this broadcast on your Facebook page. You ain't gonna hear this type of information in other places. If you like this type of information, a few things you can do. Follow us on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network. Turn on notifications. Follow me on my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP. Turn on notifications so you know when we go live. On demand, we have on demand my online course that I teach. It's I think 8 or 9 sessions, about 16, 17 hours. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa. Ma'afa is a Kiswahili term that refers to our Holocaust, the transatlantic slave trade. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa. Understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Okay, so this is a online course here. It's on demand. You can watch from around the world. It's on sale $80. Regularly $130. Your children can watch also because it's not vulgar and I don't use a lot of profanity. Also, you could donate to the African History Network, paypal.me/the AHN show, paypal.me/the AHN show, or through Cash App, $ the AHN show through Cash App, $ the AHN show through Cash App. That helps us keep doing the research, stay on the air, finance our Sunday night show, pay the bills, etc. Okay. All right, let's continue here. So we dealt with the Druids, we dealt with St. Patrick. Now I want to go with how the Irish became white. The Irish, when they come to this country, the Irish were at the bottom. When we look at the white hierarchy, they're at the bottom and they were not considered white. So how did the Irish become white? What happened with that? Okay. And then lastly, I want to deal with debunking the myth that the Irish were slaves. All right. How's everybody doing? Everybody share this broadcast. Everybody on YouTube. How's everybody doing over there on YouTube as well? All right. So up until the mid 19th century, most Irish immigrants in America were members of the Protestant middle class, When the Great Potato Famine hit Ireland in 1845 AD, close to 1 million poor and uneducated Irish Catholics began pouring into America to escape starvation. So the Irish were despised for their alien religious beliefs and unfamiliar accents by the American Protestant majority. The immigrants had trouble finding even menial jobs. When Irish Americans in the country's cities took to the streets on St. Patrick's Day to celebrate their heritage, newspapers portrayed them in cartoons as drunk, violent monkeys. Okay, now this is not meant to be derogatory. I'm dealing with history. Okay, so I want people to understand this because I know different social media platforms have different standards here. So this is not meant to be derogatory or anything like that. I encourage people also to read the article from theroot.com, When the Irish Weren't White, from theroot.com, written by Michael Harriot. Also read A Brief History of Slavery and the Origins of American Policing, A Brief History of Slavery and the Origins of American Policing by Victor E. Kappeler, Kappeler. And then Boston Globe has a really good article entitled Getting to Know the Know-Nothings, so this deals with a lot of this history that I'm going to get into. Let me see something here. All right. Okay, just making sure we're still on Facebook. Okay. All right. So when you look at the college team, the Fighting Irish, I think that goes back to a stereotype, because there was a stereotype of the Irish as being violent, drunk, fighting, things like this, right? So the American Irish soon began to realize, however, that their large and growing numbers endowed them with the political power that had yet to be exploited. They started to organize in their voting bloc. Known as the Green Machine. The Green Machine became an important swing vote for political hopefuls. Okay, so they're leveraging, they're coalescing their population to gain political power. And their voting bloc became known as the Green Machine. So even though they weren't the majority population, their voting bloc became a swing vote. So so the Green Machine became an important swing vote for political hopefuls. Suddenly, annual St. Patrick's Day parades became an importance, became a show of strength for Irish Americans, as well as a must-attend event for a slew of political candidates. For instance, in 1948, President Harry S. Truman attended New York City's St. Patrick's Day parade, a proud moment for the many Irish Americans whose ancestors had fought stereotypes and racial prejudice to find acceptance in the new world. So how did the Irish go from not being considered white by Anglo-Saxon Protestants, especially Anglo-Saxon Protestants here in this country? How did they go from that to being able to assimilate into the family of white people and rise from the ranks? So different periods of time, different groups of people are considered white or not considered white. It wasn't until the end of World War II that the Greeks and Italians were considered white here in this country. That wasn't until the end of World War II. So you have to, once again, you have to understand this country was founded by Anglo-Saxons who are Protestants, okay? They're coming from England. The Anglos and the Saxons were two groups of what were known as Germanic people, also called barbarians. And the Anglos and the Saxons go into, they conquer Ireland, but they go into what today is known as England. England is named after the Anglos. And the Anglos and the Saxons, and there's also the Jutes, Jutes, the Jutes go into England as well. But basically the Anglos and the Saxons come to this land in 1607, Virginia, and they're setting up colonies. They're Protestants. England conquers Ireland in 1155 AD, so Ireland becomes a colony of England. The Irish, a lot of the Irish are going to be Catholics. The Anglos and the Saxons are Protestants. The Protestant movement goes back to 1517, Martin Luther, the Protestant movement, and they're separating from the Catholic Church. It's a reformation, it's an exodus from the Catholic Church. So in this country, one of the reasons why the Irish were looked down upon is because at the time they're coming here is largely a Protestant country. One. Two, the Irish are Catholics. Three, Ireland was conquered by England. Okay, so they're automatically looked at as being lesser than. Okay, I'm trying to monitor this here. Are we still on Facebook? Okay, I think we're still on Facebook. All right. Just one second here. Okay, so you have to understand this history in the fight between these various countries and what's going on here. Okay, so let's continue. Okay. All right, so let's continue here. So works of Edmund Spencer with observations of his life and writings. Edmund Spencer, talking about the Irish, said, they steal, they are cruel and bloody, full of revenge and delighting in deadly execution, licentious wearers and blasphemers, common ravishers of women, and okay. So so this is one of the negative depictions of the Irish. Now, the immigrants who land at New York, whether they remain in that city or come on in the interior, are not merely ignorant and poor, which might be their misfortune rather than their fault, but they are drunken, they're riot, they riot, and so to be the objects of dislike and fear to all in whose neighborhood they congregate in large numbers. That's James Silk Buckingham, who was an author talking about the Irish. So these are some of the negative depictions that the Irish faced. These are some of the negative depictions that the Irish faced. Now, there's an article from the BBC, bbc.co.uk, entitled 1155 Ireland, the First Colony. 1155 Ireland, the First Colony. Now, some of the hatred towards the Irish probably has something to do with the fact that England conquered Ireland in 1155 AD. Ireland was the first English colony. Pope Adrian the Fourth published a papal bull giving King Henry II authority of Ireland. The document's value was that it authorized invasion. The document's value is that it authorized invasion. The Irish are then going to emigrate to the former British colonies in the U.S. Now, these are those statements from James Silk Buckingham and Edmund Spencer. These are historical statements describing a despised race of people in America. They are indicative of the sentiment that white people throughout this country, or many white people throughout this country, how they felt about the Irish, okay? And the Irish, in many cases, were looked at as lesser than human. And so the Irish were looked at as being good for nothing but for work and servitude, and they were looked at oftentimes as looked at as if they might ruin America with their crime, poverty, etc. Okay. So a lot of the stereotypes, or some of the stereotypes that white people in America had for African Americans in many ways, they had some of those same stereotypes for the Irish. All right, let's see here. Okay, how's everybody doing on YouTube? We've got Yoga, Aubrey, Margaret on YouTube. How's everybody doing? Everybody share this broadcast here. And then also we'll post this link here. African-American business owners, post the name of your business here on the thread of the broadcast. Email us at customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com, customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com. We'll let you know how you can advertise with the African History Network. And our current promotion is buy 1 month, get 2 months free. Okay, let's see who we have here on YouTube. LBZ, Euphoric, Sordell, Yoga, Journal of J News, Margaret. Okay, all right, good. And then also you donate $ the AHN show through Cash App, $ the AHN show through Cash App, or through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN show, or at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Click on the yellow donate button. Okay, so that definitely helps us keep doing the research. Now, so as we reflect on this history of St. Patrick's Day and reflect on this history of the Irish, etc., right? Especially in the Donald Trump era, in Trump's attacks on immigrants, his Muslim ban, his expanded Muslim ban, his expanded immigration ban, even before the coronavirus. We should remember when America passed laws against another group of people. We should recall when this country tried to ban people based on their religion. We should never forget that both American and whiteness are socio-political constructs that have evolved over a long period of time, always seeking, and it was not long ago that Irish Americans were on the outside looking in, okay? Now, if you look at the 1828 Noah Webster Dictionary, and it's online, if you look at the word American, it tells you that the word American refers to the Aboriginal or copper-colored people, or Aboriginal copper-colored races. And this is who Europeans found in the Americas when Europeans got to the Americas. So the word American did not originally refer to white people. And if you read books like The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence, by Dr. David Imhotep, he deals with a lot of this history, a lot of this ancient history, okay? All right, so in the book, The Renegade History of the United States, by Thaddeus Russell. Thaddeus Russell explains that the first large wave of Irish immigrants worked low-paying jobs. They were mostly building the canals along the Canadian border, and they were doing jobs that other Americans would not do. The Irish were simultaneously accused of stealing all the good jobs, and they were branded as lazy and shiftless. Okay, just like now, if you go study the history of slavery in this country, there were at least 262 skills, trades, and crafts that African people had in this country from 1619 to 1865. Okay, and the enslaved Africans were blamed for taking jobs from white people also. If you go into the Great Depression, you go into the 1930s, there were 1.8 million Mexicans who were deported from the US, sent back to Mexico. And it was said that they were sent back because it was said that they were taking jobs from white people. 60% of them were Mexican Americans. They were citizens here, and they were sent back. This is during the 1930s. It begins, I think it probably begins in the early 1930s under Herbert Hoover. It's going to continue under President Roosevelt. Herbert Hoover had a campaign called Real Jobs for Real Americans. Real Jobs for Real Americans. Herbert Hoover had this campaign called Real Jobs for Real Americans. And this was an effort to deport Mexicans back to Mexico because they felt that they were taking these jobs from white people. This is in the 1930s. History.com, which is the official website of the History Channel, has a good article dealing with this, okay? It deals with when America deported 1 million Mexicans or something like that. When America, I'll post the name of the article here, but it deals with when America deported over 1 million Mexicans. So the Irish were simultaneously accused of stealing all the good jobs and branded as lazy and shiftless. They were also thought to be the non-white missing link between the superior European and the savage African, based on stereotypes from the early American media. And this is according to an article from the Boston Globe. So once again, I'm dealing with history. I'm not dealing with racial slurs. I'm not dealing with calling people names, anything like this. I'm dealing with understanding history. The Boston Globe has a good article entitled "Getting to Know the Know Nothings." Getting to Know the Know Nothings from January 10th, 2016. An excerpt of the article says, in the popular press, the Irish were depicted as subhuman. They were carriers of disease. They were depicted as lazy, unclean, drunken brawlers who wallowed in crime. Okay. Most disturbingly, the Irish were Roman Catholics, coming to an overwhelmingly Protestant nation, and their devotion to the Pope made their allegiance to the United States suspect. Okay, their devotion to the Pope made their allegiance to the United States suspect, because the U.S. was largely a Protestant country. Even though you have freedom of religion in the U.S. based upon the First Amendment, because they were Roman Catholics, they were looked at as suspect. Now, in response to this, a nativist movement, so in response to the Irish coming in with their accents and being Roman Catholic, a nativist movement was brewing to take the country back and make it great again. In 1849, the secret order of the Star-Spangled Banner was founded in New York to resist Catholic immigration. The order was organized in local lodges whose activities were secret. Members had to be native-born Protestant men. If asked about the order, the initiated were to reply that they knew nothing. If asked about the order, the initiated were to reply that they knew nothing. Okay, so that's an excerpt from the Boston Globe dealing with getting to know the know nothings. There's another article dealing with this. So when you go study the know nothings, or they were known, it was a political party in the 1840s, in 1850s, and they were known as the American Nativist Party. They were known as the Native American Party, or nativists. They sound a lot like Donald Trump supporters in making America great again. Okay, when you go research this. So in 1788, Congress passed 3 alien acts. And these acts were based on fears of Irish Catholic and anti-immigrant sentiment. These new laws gave the president the power to stop immigration from any country at war with the U.S., stop immigration from any country at war with the U.S., and the right to deport any immigrant, and made it harder for immigrants to vote. Then again, in the late 1840s, a nationalist political party called the Know Nothings sprang from a populist movement of poor white people who were dissatisfied with the two-party system, and they started the American Party. Okay, so they were known as nativists, but they started a party, the American Party. And their intent was on preserving America's culture by restricting immigration, especially from Catholic countries, including restricting immigration by Irish Catholics. So they managed to get candidates elected into the highest political offices in America. This was the Know Nothing Party, or the American Party, in the 1840s and 1850s. Okay, this is history repeating itself. Now, Real Clear Politics has an article entitled Immigration and the Rise and Fall of the Know Nothing Party from February 18th, 2015. Immigration and the Rise and Fall of the Know Nothing Party. On February 18th, 1856, now this is still during slavery, Civil War doesn't start to April 12th, 1861. On February 1856, an anti-immigration political party held a nominating convention in Philadelphia. The American Party, the group called itself, although everyone knew it as the Know Nothing Party. In the 1840s and 1850s, American domestic politics was in the process of dividing North from South over the issue of slavery. Then a new source of angst presented itself. Huge surges of in the U.S. from cultures and countries considered by some more exotic than previous waves that had arrived from England, Germany, and Scandinavia. Okay, so you were getting immigrants coming in from different countries than immigrants who had previously come in. Okay, different from immigrants who were coming in from England, Germany, and Scandinavia. This wave of immigrants were coming in from China and Japan. On the West Coast, influxes of Chinese and Japanese workers found a new home. Millions arrived in the East from Ireland and Italy. Most of these new pilgrims were Roman Catholics. Several secretive political organizations were formed in reaction to this development. Some of the concerned activists had been Whigs, W-H-I-G-S, the Whig Party. The Whig Party goes back to about the 1830s. There was a article here I have from history.com dealing with the Whig Party, W-H-I-G. Hold on. History.com has an article, Whig Party, W-H-I-G. In 1834, political opponents of President Andrew Jackson organized a new party to contest Jacksonian Democrats nationally and in the states, guided by the most prominent leader, Henry Clay. They called themselves Whigs, the name of the English anti-monarchist party, the better to stigmatize the seventh president as King Andrew. They were immediately derided by the Jacksonian Democrats as a party devoted to the interests of wealth and aristocracy, a charge they were never able to shake completely. Yet during the party's brief life, it managed to win support from diverse economic groups in all sections and to hold its own in presidential elections. So they exist from about 1834 to about the mid 1850s, the Whig Party. So check out that article from history.com. History.com is the official website of the History Channel. Okay, let's see. Just a minute here. Okay, so on the West Coast, influxes of Chinese and Japanese workers found a new home. Um, millions more arrived in the East from Ireland and Italy. Most of these new pilgrims were Roman Catholics. Several secretive political organizations formed in reaction to this development. Some of the concerned activists had been Whigs. Some had previously been Jacksonian Democrats. I think it should be Jacksonian Democrats, named after Andrew Jackson. So the Democratic Party was basically is looked at as basically starting in 1828 as Jacksonian Democrats, named after Andrew Jackson. So all of these people professed their worry that the character of the country was changing. They expressed many fears, among them that the new settlers were more loyal to the Pope in Rome than the president in the United States. Read about the Alien and Sedition Acts at history.com, the Alien and Sedition Acts. With the passage of the Alien and Sedition Acts in the summer of 1798, American national security was used for the first time as an excuse to engage in party politics. And for that reason, discussion of the enactments are as contentious today as they were then. So when we look at the Irish being able to eventually assimilate into white society and be accepted in white society, author Thaddeus Russell suggests that the Irish did it by coalescing their political power while simultaneously assimilating into the American mainstream, specifically with jobs in the civil service, which is why most cities' St. Patrick's Day parades are ostensibly celebrations of police and fire departments, okay? Because a lot of them are going to get jobs in the police and fire departments. So, for instance, in 1840, at the beginning of the great wave of Irish immigration, there was only a handful of Irish police officers on the police force in 1840. By the end of that year, the Irish made up more than 1/4 of the New York City police officers. And by the end of the century, by the end of the 1800s, into the 19th century, more than half of the New York City's police officers and more than 75% of New York City's firefighters were Irish Americans. In addition, the Irish were disproportionately represented among prosecutors, attorneys, prosecutors, judges, and prison guards. Soon, the Irish cop was a stock figure in American culture. If you look at the movie Hoodlum, starring Lawrence Fishburne, about Bumpy Johnson in like the 1930s, I think it was, Hoodlum. You have an Irish police chief in the movie Hoodlum. Oh, he's a captain or a police chief, but he's Irish. So you have this stereotype. So once known as loud and rowdy and barbaric, things like this, the Irish were now able to show themselves as the most selfless and patriotic servants. Now, if you watch any police funeral, okay, across the country, you'll most likely see bagpipes being played at the funeral, regardless of the race or ethnicity of the officer who was killed. That is a testament of the influence of the Irish on police departments, because bagpipes are coming from Ireland, and that part of Irish culture we see infused into police departments all across the country. Now, in an article from Dr. Victor E. Kappeler, Kappeler, who is an associate dean and foundation professor in the School of Justice Studies at Eastern Kentucky University, he wrote an article entitled "A Brief History of Slavery and the Origins of American Policing," a brief history of slavery and the origins of American policing. And in the article, he said the birth and development of the American police can be traced to a multitude of historical and political economic conditions. The birth of policing, the birth and development of American police can be traced to a multitude of historical, legal, and political economic conditions. The institution of slavery and the control of minorities, however, were two of the more formidable historic features of American society shaping early policing. Slave patrols and night watches, which later became modern police departments, were both designed to control the behaviors of minorities, okay, especially African Americans. Slave patrols and night watches, which, just a second here, okay. Slave patrols and night watches, which later became modern police departments, were both designed to control the behaviors of Native Americans. So hold on, let's see. Were both designed to control the behaviors of minorities. For example, New England settlers appointed Indian constables to police Native Americans. The St. Louis police were founded to protect residents from Native Americans in that frontier, and many Southern police departments began as slave patrols. In 1704, the colony of Carolina developed the nation's first slave patrol. Slave patrols helped to maintain the economic order and to assist the wealthy landowners in recovering and punishing slaves who essentially were considered property. Okay. Let me see who we have here on YouTube. B. Judge, Soleil, Jade of Journal. You got Jade, Yoga, Margaret. Okay, shout out to everybody watching us on YouTube. Okay, how's everybody doing? And we'll post the information here about the online course that I teach as well. It's all on demand. You can watch at your own pace. Okay, we got somebody in Atlanta. How's everybody doing battling the coronavirus? Is everybody all right? We know people at home with their children. Children are out of school. The state of Kansas has said that they are they're suspending the rest of the children are going to be out for the rest of the school year. And you may have some other school districts that do that also, some other states that do that. So now policing was not the only social institution enmeshed in slavery. Slavery was fully institutionalized in the American economic and legal order, with laws being enacted at both the state and national divisions of government. The colony, then state of Virginia, for example, enacted more than 130 slave statutes between 1689 and 1865. We know that Virginia doesn't have codified slave laws till 1661, right about 1661. And the first colony to have codified slave laws is Massachusetts in 1641. So when you hear me talk about August 20, 1619 in Virginia, when those 28 Africans on the White Line slave ship come into Virginia, codified slave laws don't exist in 1619 in the 13 British colonies. Okay. I'm not talking about the Spanish colonies. I'm talking about the British colonies. Codified slave laws don't even exist then. They're going to be put into a form of indentured servitude. So a lot of people found this out in 2019 when you had like the 1619 project and other things and presentations I was doing, et cetera. So the whole way slavery evolves in this country is the way we think it evolved is totally different than the way it actually evolved. That's why we have to study history. Okay, that's why Before the Mayflower by Lerone Bennett Jr. is such a good book. I need a new copy. It's beat up. This is the 6th edition. In chapter 2, he really gets into a lot of this history, how a lot of the ways that we think slavery evolved in this country, that's not the way it happened. Okay, how you doing, Misunderstood? Okay, you got the notification I was on live. Yeah, everybody turn on the live notification so you'll be notified when I go live, because a lot of people don't know, for whatever reason, a lot of people don't know like when I go live. All right, let's continue here. I'm almost done. I want to make sure I give you all of this here. Okay, so slavery and the abuse of people of color, or specifically African Americans, African people, however, was not merely a Southern affair, as many have been taught to believe. We know slavery existed at one point in all of the 13 colonies. Connecticut, New York, and other colonies enacted laws to criminalize and control slaves. Congress also passed fugitive slave laws, allowing the detention and return of escaped slaves in 1793 and 1850. Okay. And also the U.S. Constitution laid the foundation for the fugitive slave laws. I think it's Article 4, laid the foundation for the fugitive slave laws. I think it's Article 4, Section 2. So let's see here. The similarities between the slave patrols and modern American policing are too salient to dismiss or ignore. Hence, the slave patrol should be considered a forerunner of modern American law enforcement. Okay. Now, this is not an attack. This is not an attack on police officers or anything like that. That's not what I'm saying. I'm talking about understanding history and understanding how this evolves. Okay. I encourage people to read the article to get a better understanding of what it is I'm talking about. Read the article, A Brief History of Slavery and the Origins of American Policing. Okay. And this is from, let's see, which publication is that from? Yeah, that is from plsonline.eku.edu. That is from which university is that? Eastern Kentucky University, I think it is. Yeah, Eastern Kentucky University. Okay, that's by Dr. Victor E. Kappeler, PhD. He's an associate dean and foundation professor in the School of Justice Studies at Eastern Kentucky University. Okay, so he has an article on their university website, A Brief History of Slavery and the Origins of American Policing. So that's what that's dealing with. It's not it's not attacking police officers or anything like that. And I'm saying that because different social media platforms were broadcasting on multiple social media platforms, and they have changes in their guidelines dealing with hate speech, etc. All right. So in his book, so Noel Ignatiev, Ignatiev, wrote a book entitled How the Irish Became White. And in his book, he says, while the white skin made the Irish eligible for membership in the white race, it did not guarantee their admission into the white earning. Noel Ignatiev and other scholars argue that the sons of Ireland gained their white status by joining the fight against by joining the fight against the abolitionist movement and uniting in the suppression of African Americans and embracing the oldest American tradition of them all, racism. So you have scholars like Noel Ignatieff and others who argue that the Irish were able to assimilate and become part of the white race, considered white, by joining the effort to keep Africans enslaved and uniting in the suppression of African people. Angela F. Murphy, the author Angela F. Murphy, said, while Irish American repealers maintain a pride and love for their homeland, they acted unabashedly American in the way they dealt with the slavery controversy. They acted unabashedly American in the way they dealt with the slavery controversy. She said this in her book, American Slavery, Irish Freedom, Abolition, Immigrant Citizenship, and the Transatlantic Movement for Irish Repeal. American Slavery, Irish Freedom, Abolition, Immigration Citizenship, and the Transatlantic Movement for Irish Repeal. Okay. So also, for more information, check out the article, When America Despised the Irish, the 19th Century's Refugees. That's at history.com, official website of the History Channel, by Christopher Klein. He has a really good article there, When America Despised the Irish, the 19th Century's Refugee Crisis. Okay, so lastly, let's deal with debunking the myth about the Irish were slaves. New York Times has a good article by Liam Stack, March 17th, 2017, debunking a myth the Irish were not slaves to. Debunking a myth the Irish were not slaves to. So the reason, yes, it is true that all people coming here, some type of discrimination or racism or bigotry, etc. That is true. None of it was on the level that African Americans suffered and African people suffered. Okay, but it doesn't take anything away from you to recognize of how people were mistreated. Okay, especially if you understand history, it's important to do that. Now, let me pull up this article here. So if we look at this article from the New York Times, historians say that the idea of Irish slaves is based on a misreading of history, and that the distortion is often politically motivated. You'll see oftentimes far right memes on social media that are being used against African Americans, and they'll say things like the Irish were slaves too. We got over it, so why can't you? I've seen those before on Facebook, for instance. Okay, and then when African Americans talk about reparations, you'll see Irish were slaves too. They didn't, we didn't ask for reparations. Why are you asking for reparations, etc.? So a small group of Irish and American scholars had spent years pushing back on this false history. In the year 2016, 82 Irish scholars and writers signed an open letter denouncing the Irish slave myth and asking publications to stop mentioning it. Some complied, removing or revising articles that referenced the false claims, but the letter's impact was limited. So when we look at fact versus fiction here, dealing with the myth that the Irish were slaves basically here in the U.S. Okay, I'm not talking about during the period of time when Patrick lived. Okay, I'm not talking about 5th century AD. That's not what I'm talking about. And let me post this article here also for you all. Well, we'll put this in the notes of the broadcast. Okay, this is at NewYorkTimes.com. Okay, so when we look at fact versus fiction, so the Irish slave narrative is based on the misinterpretation of the history of indentured servitude, which is how many poor Europeans migrated to North America and the Caribbean in the early colonial period, historians say. Without a doubt, life was bad for indentured servants. That's true, many of them. They were often treated brutally. Not all of them entered servitude willingly. Some were political prisoners, some were children. Now, Liam Hogan, a research librarian in Ireland, who has spearheaded this debunking effort, said, "I'm not saying it was pleasant or anything. It was the opposite, but it was a completely different category from slavery. It was a transitory state." So we see indentured servants being used in this country, white indentured servants, and you can have some indentured servants who are black as well coming to this country, especially in the 1600s. We know from 1611 to 1783, Europe is going to empty its jails, and you have criminals and things like this coming here, prostitutes, etc. Early on, indentured servants are used, and then when the system of slavery is being formulated in this country and then becomes for perpetuity, is going to shift more over to slavery and less reliant on indentured servants, especially white indentured servants. It becomes more expensive to have indentured servants. You're going to have a lot of them who run away and go live among white people. And since they're white, it's easier for them to blend in when they run away. Okay, so for different reasons, you're going to have indentured servants. You're going to have a shift over from the uses of indentured servants, and the indentured period of time is in general from 5 to 7 years. Early on, it could be from like 3 to 5 years. Earlier on in the 1600s, you would see it from maybe 3 to 5 years, and then you'll see it go from possibly 5 to 7 years. It just depended. So the legal differences between indentured servitude and chattel slavery were profound, according to Matthew Riley, Reilly, an archaeologist who studies Barbados. Unlike slaves, servants were considered legally human. Unlike slaves, servants or indentured servants were considered legally human. Their servitude was based on a contract that limited their service to a finite period of time, usually about 7 years, in exchange for passage to the colonies. They did not pass their unfree status on to descendants, meaning if they had children, their children were not born in servitude. Okay, it's different than chattel slavery. Now, contemporary accounts in Ireland sometimes refer to these people as slaves. Contemporary accounts in Ireland sometimes refer to these people, the indentured servants, as slaves. Mr. Hogan said, that was true in the sense that any form of coerced labor can be described as slavery from ancient Rome to modern day human trafficking. But in colonial America and the Caribbean, the word slavery had a specific legal meaning. Europeans, by definition, were not included in that. They were not slaves. Now, Leslie Harris is a professor of African American history at Northwestern University. Leslie Harris said, an indenture implies two people have entered into a contract with each other, but slavery is not a contract. It is often about being a prisoner of war or being bought or sold bodily as part of a trade. That is a critical distinction. So the article shows some different memes about the Irish were slaves and why they had it hard. Why can't you get over it? Referring to black people, etc. So these memes are the number one derailment people use when they talk about the slave trade, referring to African people. Look in any race-related or slavery-related news story from the past 2 years, from 2017 going back to 2015, and someone will mention it in the comments. So the memes often have common elements. Um, let's see here. So the memes will often have common elements. The false claim that the Irish people were enslaved in America or the Caribbean after the 1649 British invasion of Ireland led by Oliver Cromwell. The false claim that Irish slaves were cheaper and treated worse than African slaves. The false claim that Irish women were forcibly bred with black men. Okay, so you see a lot of these myths and a lot of these just false statements, and they're oftentimes used to belittle or to mitigate the enslavement of African people. Now, some of them are easy to disprove. Some of these statements are easy to disprove. Many of the memes use photographs, including photographs of Jewish Holocaust victims or 20th century child laborers, to illustrate events they claim happened in the 17th century, the 1600s, long before the invention of photography. The modern day camera wasn't invented until mid 1820s. That's called the daguerreotype camera, named after John daguerreotype. It's right around 1826, 1827. It wasn't available for commercial usage until the 1830s, the daguerreotype. Many of these memes reference a non-existent 1625 proclamation by King James II, who was not born until 1633. They often hijack specific atrocities committed against African slaves and substitute Irish people for these actual victims. A favorite event is to use the 1781 Zong massacre, Z-O-N-G, Zong massacre, in which over 130 African slaves were thrown to their deaths off a slave ship. Okay, so you'll have people who will use that in hoping people don't know about the Zong massacre and say, "Oh, that was the Irish." They'll falsely claim that Irish people were the victims of the Zong massacre, whose death toll they will inflate by adding a zero to the end of it and say there were 1,300 Irish slaves involved in the Zong massacre. Now, when we look at the roots of this, right? What's behind this? What's behind this myth that the Irish were slaves? So the white slavery narrative has long been a staple of the far right, but it became specifically Irish after the 2000 publication of To Hell or Barbados. Okay. And this was a book that dealt with the ethnic cleansing of Ireland. All right, now, in America, the book connected the white slavery narrative to an influential ethnic group of over 34 million people, many of whom had been raised on stories of Irish rebellion against Britain and tales of anti-Irish bias in America at the turn of the 20th century. And from there, it's going to take off. Now, Ireland has a long history of verifiable tragedies, centuries of British occupation, famine, immigration, sectarian violence. 3 decades of armed conflict in Northern Ireland ended only in 1998, and paramilitary violence has intermittently flared ever since. Mr. Hogan said it was upsetting for many Irish people to see that history used as a weapon by Americans who claim a connection to the country. He said that for some people, it seemed like the meme was replacing the actual history of their Irish heritage. Now, it is true that anti-Irish sentiment was present in the United States until well into the 20th century or the 1900s. But that is a separate issue from the 17th century indentured servitude. The descendants of indentured servants, Irish or otherwise, did not face a legacy of racism similar to the legacy faced by people of African descent. Nevertheless, the meme's existence is unsurprising. There has been Ms. Harris said, there has been a huge backlash against talking about slavery that continues to this day. She said, not to mention Jim Crow and other forms of discrimination against African Americans that grew out of enslavement. This continued misuse of Irish history devalues the real history, said Mr. Hogan. There are libraries filled with all the bad things that actually did happen. We don't need memes and these dodgy articles full of lies. So check out this article here, which helps to really dispel this myth that the Irish were slaves. I'm not saying the Irish did not face adversity, discrimination here in this country. That's not what I'm saying. But a lot of these memes are just full of lies. Debunking a myth, the Irish were not slaves too. Debunking a myth, the Irish were not slaves too. This is from the New York Times, March 17th, 2017, okay, by Liam Stack. All right, how's everybody doing? Facebook and YouTube, post your questions here, post your comments. How you all like this type of information? Click the like button or thumbs up if you like this type of information. You can support the African History Network. You can donate through Cash App, $the AHN show, through Cash App, $the AHN show through Cash App. So if you want to donate 10, 15, 25, $100, whatever it is, or through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN show, paypal.me/the AHN show, or at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Click on the yellow donate button. Sign up for our email newsletter. Text the word Kemet, K-E-M-E-T, to 22828. Text the word Kemet, K-E-M-E-T, to 22828. To sign up for our email newsletter, okay? And African-American business owners, email us at customerservice@AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, customerservice@AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We'll let you know how you can advertise with the African History Network. Register for my online class. It's all on demand. Watch at your own pace. Watch all around the world. It's a 8-session. I think it's about 9 sessions, about 18 hours. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa. Understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa. Understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Okay, we just posted a link for that. And it's at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. How you doing, El Malik? Misunderstood, Black Spectrum. Okay. All right, so we have a couple new advertisers here. Sage and Elm Apothecary, sageandelmapothecary.com, produces products, bath and beauty products. They use simple ingredients such as whole fruits, herbs, and vegetables. Each product crafted offers a unique plant-based experience. They design over 60 different products like handcrafted soaps, natural toothpaste, hydrating oils, deodorant, face masks, shampoos, conditioners, and so much more. Visit their website, sageandelmapothecary.com, APOTHECARY. You can order their products there, but also find out about their pop-up shops, and their vending events. And use the promo code AHN Spring 20, AHN Spring 20, to get 20% off. Now, some people are still traveling. You may be driving. You may fly. I know flights are cheap right now. I talked to some people who book flights, Southwest Airlines, things like that. Flights are cheap right now. But when you travel in style. Carry your culture with you with blacklionleather.com, blacklionleather.com. BlackLionLeather.com is a unique travel accessory brand. They manufacture and sell online to the culturally inspired African-American traveler. They are 100% African-American owned and operated. Their motto is carry your culture. So they have leather travel accessories at their website, BlackLionLeather.com. So when you travel, you can travel in style and carry your culture. You can carry your culture with you. So author Teresa Roseman is the author of the book, She Remembered Her Path. She Remembered Her Path. And this book is a poem which centers on a woman named Sheteria. Sheteria is a woman who finds herself in trouble. She feels she cannot make decisions that were simple in her younger life. The fear is Sheteria has stepped off the path she has created and now needs guidance to return to her confident self. Find out what happens in Sheteria in the book by author Teresa Roseman, She Remembered Her Path, available at eBay, Barnes & Noble, Amazon.com, and it's also available in Amazon Kindle format as well. Okay, let's see. Black Spectrum. Okay, everybody, listen to the African History Network show Sundays, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or 9, 10 a.m. to Superstation WFDF, and we broadcast on our Facebook fan page and YouTube live. Listen to the audio podcast. We have these broadcasts in audio podcast format. Click on AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Click on AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, and right on the homepage, click on listen to podcasts. Okay, we have about 1,000 podcasts there. We have my DVD lectures and bundle packs. So all of my DVD lectures are available at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We know a lot of people are home now. They're looking for something to do. You still want to learn. We have a 15 DVD bundle pack, the Michael Imhotep Black History Month bundle pack. That's on sale. It's $100, regularly about $250 at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. It's right on the homepage. But then also we have the Black Migrations 1619 to 2019 6 DVD bundle pack, and it's also in digital download format as well. Okay, and Black Migrations was the 2019 theme for African American History Month. Okay, Black Migrations 1619 to 2019. So we have that in DVD format and digital download format. That's on sale, I think 50 at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. So that bundle pack includes Black Migrations. It includes 6 principles of political self-defense, understanding how laws and policies impact the economic conditions of African Americans. It includes my presentation dealing with the history of Juneteenth. Also dealing with, I also did a presentation dealing with the history of why African Americans switched from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party. Why African Americans switched from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party. Also, you get my presentation dealing with the history of when Black men dominated horse racing. Okay, when Black men dominated horse racing. Because we used to win the Kentucky Derbies, we used to dominate horse racing, and we were pushed out of horse racing. Okay, a lot of the early Kentucky Derbies were won by African American jockeys. Oliver Lewis won the first Kentucky Derby when it ran in 1875, and he was 19 years old. He was an African American man. He was 19 years old. You had jockeys like Alonzo Lonnie Clayton, Jimmy Winkfield. These guys win the Kentucky Derby. When the first Kentucky Derby was ran in 1875, 13 of the 15 jockeys were Black. A lot of people don't know this history, okay? And we were forced out of horse racing. So that's in the 6 DVD bundle pack, Black Migrations, the Black Migrations bundle pack. Okay, look, everybody, we're going to get out of here. Remember, at the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world. Because right now it's corrects wrong behavior. What you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you and get away with is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you have been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. Remember, right now it's corrects wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever. We'll talk to you next time. Peace.